At the end of the interrogation, Linda was no longer convinced I was the perpetrator. In fact, she thought they might have the wrong guy. She wanted to start investigating this case from scratch. So she elected not to arrest me, went back to Fort Collins, called FBI's Behavioral Science Unit at Quantico, asking them if they could do an unbiased profile on the case. And they told her they could do that, and they would even do that for free. It wouldn't cost Fort Collins PD anything. So she took this up to her superiors, and her superiors said, if Tim Masters' name isn't at the top of a list, you're not going to do that. So her marching orders were clear. If she wasn't going after Tim, she wasn't on the case. And so she put it on the shelf, didn't investigate it anymore until she left. Nobody touched it until she left Fort Collins PD. After the interview in '92, I walked out of the Naval Intelligence building being pissed off because these people from Fort Collins are trying to come back into my life again 5 years later over something I didn't do. And I walked out. Special Agent Richard Betts walked out with me, and I still remember clear as day. He leaned against my car, crossed his arms, and said, "Tim, this is over. Put all this bullshit behind you." And so that's what I tried to do. In '93, I re-enlisted, and I was transferred to NAS Miramar, California. This is me re-enlisted right here, which is why Lieutenant Mitchell was laughing at me. In '94, my squadron closed down, so I transferred to China Lake, California, where I finished my second enlistment. This is a photo of me when I was promoted to E5. And I stayed in the Navy until the summer of '97. After 8 years, I separated with an honorable discharge. After leaving the Navy, I found employment with Learjet in Wichita, Kansas, as a contractor. And so I worked there for about 9 months, then came home on vacation in August '98. And one morning, Fort Collins police showed up at my door, and I was arrested. I was extradited to Colorado, and I stood trial for Peggy Hendricks' murder. And obviously I lost, or we wouldn't be here. So the question a lot of people have is, how did the prosecution win with no witnesses and no physical evidence? Well, they supplied their own experts with a few hand-selected crime scene photos. Like Tom Bevel is a renowned crime scene reconstruction expert, blood splatter expert. Out of like 250 photographs, they gave this guy like 12 photos, handpicked by Jim Broderick, with notes on them saying things like blood pool at landings where victim was stabbed. So Tom Bevel's going off the assumption they have reason to believe she was stabbed right there. That's where he went from. They claim that Peggy Hendrick looked like my mother, and this was some sort of displaced matricide. This is Peggy Hendrick right here. This was my mother. They looked nothing alike. Peggy Hendrick had red, wavy hair. My mother had brown hair. Sometimes it was curly, sometimes straight. And police knew this. This is my mom's autopsy report. This was taken, I got this out of the police files that they turned over to us at my trial. In their police report, my mother's head is described as covered by graying brown hair, not red, wavy hair. Red hair was a huge issue in my trial. And they showed the jury hundreds of stories and drawings that I created, violent, gory, graphic stuff that scared the hell out of the jury. Made him think that if he's capable of having these violent thoughts, he must have committed this crime. And they hired a forensic psychologist to dissect and interpret my violent stories and drawings, and even though none existed, created a nexus between them and this case. And they withheld volumes of exculpatory evidence. Pretty much anything that was in my favor was withheld from us. So I was convicted, sentenced to life in prison, and this is where I spent most of that time, Buena Vista Correctional Facility near Salida, Colorado. This was my cell in 2007, 3 West 7. It's 6 foot by 8 foot. You see, everything I own in the world was right there. So right away, after the conviction, I appealed to the appellate court. And I thought, there's no way in the world that 3 intelligent judges are going to look at this case and not see that I was convicted because of stories and drawings that had nothing to do with the case. So I was shocked when they voted 3-0 against me and called the stories and drawings harmless error. In other words, I still would have been convicted without the stories and drawings. I said, okay, on to the state Supreme Court. We filed a writ of certiorari, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear my case. So we filed our appeal to the Supreme Court, and once again I thought there's no way 7 intelligent judges are going to look at this case and not see I should not have been convicted, that the stories and drawings should not have come in at trial. So once again I was shocked with the 4-3 vote. The majority called the stories harmless error once again. So then my lawyer, Nathan Chambers, dropped another bombshell on me. I thought after losing at the state Supreme Court I would have to go to the federal courts. And it could take decades to get to the U.S. Supreme Court. Well, Nate tells me, you can't go to the federal courts yet. You have to exhaust your state remedies, which in Colorado means filing this motion called a 35C. And most of them aren't worth the paper they're printed on because every inmate who's been convicted files a 35C. So I thought, great, I have to waste another 4 years of my life in prison messing around with this motion that's going to either win or lose at district court, then go up to the appellate court, win or lose, then go up to the state Supreme Court again before I can go to the federal courts. But okay, I dug in, started doing research, and I filed a motion 5 months later. And I'm not a lawyer, so with the motion I requested they appoint counsel to me. In May 2003, an attorney out of Greeley named Maria Lou was appointed to my case. And she took a look at all the discovery, and she thought right away that she had an innocent case, a true innocence case. So she brought probably one of the best trial lawyers in the country, Dave Wymore, on board. And around the same time, there was a private citizen that lived in Lakewood named Taylor Maris. He saw a story on A&E's cold case files that they had done on this case, where they basically just crucified me. Showed the stories and drawings, and at the end of the show, they opined that I was right where I needed to be in prison, that I was guilty. And Taylor watched this, and he says, wait a minute, where's the evidence? He said he kept watching this show, and all he keeps seeing are stories and drawings, but no real evidence tying me to the case. And he's like, wait, there's no DNA? They convicted him with nothing? And so Taylor became one of my biggest supporters. One day when Taylor was talking to me on the phone, I mentioned Linda Holloway, how I thought Linda Holloway was on my side, she knew I was innocent. So he got in touch with Linda Holloway. Linda Holloway was friends with Richard and Selma. You guys met Richard.
Selma was here along with Wolfie. Yes.
Did you ride the dogs?
Yeah, I ride the dogs.
So Linda's friends with Richard and Selma. She suggested that Richard and Selma should do touch DNA testing on the clothing because the clothing, in this case, had never been tampered with. So we began the fight to have DNA testing done on Peggy Hetrick's clothing around 2005. And of course, they opposed us right away. At the same time, David Wymore hires Barry Getz and Cordell Brown. Barry Getz was a former director of the CBI crime labs down in the Springs, and he's an expert in crime scene reconstruction. Cordell Brown was also from the CBI crime labs and is an expert in firearms identification and tool marks, and important to us was the knife cuts. So Barry Getz started looking at this case with a fresh set of eyes. Everybody else who looked at the crime scene photos was looking at it from the perspective, how do we tie Tim to this? Well, Barry just looks at it with the idea, let's figure out what happened. So one of the first things that Barry notices is the blood trail. The prosecution's theory is that someone stabbed Peggy Hetrick at the curb of Landings, dragged her into the field while she's still bleeding, dropped her on the ground, then performed the sexual mutilations to her right out there in the field. Barry looks at these crime scene photos, and he notices on the drag trail, there's blood right here at the beginning of the drag trail, the street's over here. There's no blood, and there's furrows in the ground right here. There's drag marks and no blood, and then you have blood and no drag marks again. And Barry came to the conclusion that two people had carried her into the field.